I want you to take a look at the math passage that we have in front of us. And for today's assessment situation, I'm going to ask you to look at this reading passage, and I'm going to ask you to say to yourself, that's kind of hard for me to understand. Because this is a math test, I'm not testing you on your reading. I'm only testing you on your ability to figure out and work math problems, okay? So when you're looking at this, I know when you look at that, you kind of think, oh, that might be a little bit hard for me to read. So on the very first step in our first cue card that I'm introducing for you today is to please read it for me. When you look at a test like this, now sometimes for math problems, they're just written out like 32 plus 16, and you won't need me to read that for you. But sometimes when they're written out in word form like this as a story problem, you're going to need to ask me to read that for you because it might be a little difficult for you. Again, I'm testing you on math, not on your reading ability today. So I want you to look at it at the first cue card, and the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is to say to me, would you read that for me? So when you look at this passage and then you have that math question in front of you, I want you to look at it and say to yourself, that might be a little hard for me to read, and I want you to ask me to read it to you. Okay?
Okay.
So let's pretend you're looking at this for the first time, and the very first thing you're going to say to me is,
Read it for me, please.
Excellent. Jay and Ben shared a pizza. Jay ate 5/8 of the pizza, and Ben ate the remainder of the pizza. How much more of the pizza did Jay eat than Ben? Now, I've read it to you the first time, and you're already probably thinking, now wait, there's two names in there, I got a little confused. So the next thing on your cue card is that I want you to always ask me to read it again, so that you can be clear on what the question is asking before you even go any further, okay? So go ahead and take this second, and go ahead and ask me to read it for you again.
Can you read that again?
Absolutely. Jay and Ben shared a pizza. Jay ate 5/8 of the pizza, and Ben ate the remainder of the pizza. How much more of the pizza did Jay eat than Ben? Now, if I point to your cue card, I'm asking you to remember that you need to ask me to read it for you the first time or ask me to read it again. The third step on your cue card is that I want you to ask me to explain something to me. I want you to pretend that you didn't really get this the first time, that you didn't really understand it very well, and you're really not sure what to do. So I want you to use this third step, and I want you to ask me to explain it to you.
What's this mean?
Good. This section right here is asking you to look at Jay and Ben, and they're looking at sharing a pizza, okay? They're having the same exact pizza, and they're going to have one of them's going to have some parts of it, and the other's going to have other parts of it. 5 out of 8 of the pizza is what Jay eats. Ben gets to eat the remainder of the pizza. Now, the last question asks you, how much more of the pizza did Jay eat than Ben? It doesn't ask how much did Ben eat. It asks how much more did Jay eat than Ben. Okay? Do you have a little bit more clear idea of what to do now?
Yes.
All right. After I've read it, and I've read it again, and you can ask me to explain it, any parts that you don't understand, then I would say to you, okay, if you're not sure of what to do, would it help me to read it again? And you would say, yeah, I think it will help me to read it again. If after I read it the second time you're still not sure what you're supposed to do, then you would say, I would say, would it help me to help you to have me explain it to you a little bit more? And then you say, yeah, I think it does. Maybe if you say it in a different way, if you're using different words, then you can, then I can explain it to you again. The last step on your cue card is that you can have as much time as you need to take this test that is necessary. So I can read this as many times as you need me to read it in order for you to understand what to do. So it won't make any difference how much time it's taking for us. If we have to read each question several times, that's absolutely fine. I want you to remember that there's no time issue with this test at all. I just want you to remember that you can use as much time as you need. Okay?
Okay.
This one can also be a little bit tricky. So sometimes when you ask me to explain it to you, I might say to you, would it help you if you drew a picture? So in this particular passage, you might be able to say, well, let me get some scrap paper. Let me see if I can draw a picture to help me understand what I'm supposed to do. So sometimes that drawing a picture might help as well. Okay? How's that new puppy? I hear you got one.
Yeah, we got him over at the gas station.
Oh, how fun. What'd you name it?
We named it Copper.
How big's Copper getting now?
She's still pretty small.
Always fun. Puppies are always a lot of fun. Hey, I also heard you did really well in your last science test.
Yeah, I guess.
Good. It helped when you heard the passages read to you, didn't it?
Yeah,
Good.
this science teacher's really nice.
Excellent. Glad to hear it. Well, on this one, if you remember, the last time we were working together during testing, we were looking at using your cue card. to help you know what to do to ask me for help. And the very first step was to always ask me to
Read it again.
read it again. Excellent job. So I'm going to read this to you, and you're going to pretend like this is the first time that you've seen it. After I read it to you, I'm going to stop and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how you can ask for some help in more specific ways for reading it, to kind of be prepared to listen for some answers as I'm reading it. Okay?
Okay.
All right. This is called Birbal and the Barber. King Akbar ruled India many hundreds of years ago. He did not know how to read or to write, but he was a very good king. He surrounded himself with wise ministers who gave him advice about ruling the country. That's me to read the story. That's exactly what you should have done, because this was a little bit harder passage for you, and that's something that you should have asked me to do, and you did. You remembered, and it wasn't even on your cue card, so way to go on that. Now, the second thing I want to talk about with you today is that sometimes it's very helpful for you to have a little bit of a strategy in mind when you're asking me to read things for you. So what I teach my students to do is I teach my students to actually ask for the questions to be read first. Because when you hear the questions, you have a better idea of what you're supposed to answer when you're listening to the passage. Some of the answers kind of start popping out at you from the passage as I read. So I always teach my students to ask me to read the questions first.
Okay.
So when you ask me to read it to you or to read it again, I want you to always try to remember to ask me to read the questions first, so that you know what you're listening for when you're reading the passage. Okay? So in that very first section, I want you to say, would you please start with the passage, start with the questions before you read the passage. Okay? Can you try that?
Okay. Can you read the questions for me?
Absolutely. The first question is, this passage can best be described as an example of A, a story, B, a play, C, a poem, or D, an article. So you're going to be thinking about, as I read the passage, does it sound more like a story, a play, a poem, or an article? Okay? The second thing you're going to be listening for is the passage says that one thing that made King Akbar a good king was that he did what? That he read many great books, that he had many bags of gold, that he wrote many fine stories, or that he had many wise ministers. As I read, you're going to be listening for what made him a good king. Okay? And the third question I want you to be listening for as we read is, how did the barber feel after the king told him that he would have to leave the kingdom? The barber was his helper, and the king told him in the story that he was going to have to leave. And I want you to be thinking about how he felt when the king told him he had to leave. Do you think he was going to be angry, calm, sad, or thankful? And there's going to be some clues in the story that help you know how he was feeling when he was asked to leave. Okay? So now that you're listening, you know what you're listening for. You're listening for what type of a passage it is, a story, a play, poem, or an article. You're listening for what made him a good king, and you're listening for how the barber felt when he was asked to leave. And I'm going to go back and read the passage so you know what you're listening for as I read. Okay?
Okay.
Birbal and the Barber. King Akbar ruled India many hundreds of years ago. He did not know how to read or write, but he was... I'm going to ask you to grab your pencil, and as I reread, because you've already asked me to read it again, I'm going to reread the passage, and I'm going to ask you to start starring or underlining some information that's going to help you answer those three questions we started with. Remember, those three questions again were, what type of a passage was it? What was the thing that made King Akbar a good king? And how did the barber feel after he was told to leave? Okay? As I reread here, I want you to start starring or underlining passages, the information in the passage that's going to help you answer the question. I want to actually focus on this one about how the barber felt.
Okay.
Because that one is going to be answered in the section that I'm going to read. Okay? So I want you to listen to the clues that the story gives you that help you know how he felt. Okay? I'm going to start reading right here. Birbal saw Akbar's barber sobbing behind a rose bush. He hurried over and patted the poor barber gently on the shoulder. "What's the matter?" he asked. "The king has ordered me to leave his kingdom forever," the barber said through his tears. Now, are there some clues in that passage so far that helped you know how he's feeling about that?
Yes.
Can you underline those for me? Good, you found both of those clues. He's got some tears, and he's sobbing. Both of those helped you know how he was feeling. So when you hear the passage read, you can look back at the question, and you can say to yourself, all right, if he's crying and he's sobbing uncontrollably, is he going to be angry? Is he going to be calm? Is he going to be sad? Or is he going to be thankful? Which of those answer choices do you think would be the best choice?
Sad.
Okay. Now, if you weren't sure of sad, I'm going to show you one other thing that you can do to help you answer this question. If you were still thinking, let's pretend that you were not sure whether he was sad or angry, because sometimes when people get angry, they cry too. Let's pretend you were kind of trying to decide between those two. Are there answer choices that you know are not right?
Calm and thankful.
Very good. I want you to go ahead and mark through the answer choices that you know aren't right, because then you're going to be narrowing your choices to make a better guess, even if you're not sure.
Okay.
You have ruled out two choices, calm and thankful. And I like the way you marked through the answer choices and not the letter choice, because sometimes in our multiple choice questions, the computer will pick up the pencil lead that you leave in the letter. So I always teach my students to mark through the answer choice itself and not the letter, okay? So now that you've marked out some choices, you can make a better guess or make a better prediction about what the answer is going to be, because you only have two to choose from now instead of all four, okay? So now that you use some information from the passage, you underlined some things that I was reading to you as I was reading it to you, and you were able to mark out some of the answers that you knew weren't right, then you have a better chance of answering that question correctly. Okay?
Okay.
Now, I can see that you're starting to get that glazed over look. Do you want to stop and take a break real quick? I want you to ask me to read parts of the passage again that you know are going to answer the question, okay? You don't have to ask me to read the whole entire test again. You don't have to ask me to read the whole entire story again. If you know what part that the answer would be in, you can just say, can you read me that part about whatever? And I can just read that section to you, and you can be listening for the answer. So when you're looking at this question, what part could you ask me to read again for you?
Can you read me that part about him crying again?
Absolutely. That's perfect. So then when I go back to the passage, I'm not going to read the entire thing start to finish. I'm going to find for you that section about when he's crying. And then I would go back to it and I'd say, okay, here's where the part that he was starting to cry. Birbal saw Akbar's barber sobbing behind a rosebush. He hurried over and patted the poor barber gently on the shoulder. What's the matter? He asked. The king has ordered me to leave his kingdom forever, the barber said through his tears. Leave the kingdom forever? Why would he want you to do that? Well, this morning the king stubbed his toe and was stung by a bee. And then the rest of the section would go on to kind of show you in that question that he was feeling sad about it, okay? So when you see that question, you can always ask me to read just the part that's going to answer that question, okay? For the same thing is true that if you need me to read just part of the question again, you don't want to hear the entire question because sometimes the questions are a little bit long. You can ask me to read, can you just read that one part about whatever? You can also ask me to read just some of the answer choices. You don't have to ask me to read all of the answer choices at the same time, okay? So that's the kind of things that I want you to be thinking about as you use this cue card. I want you to be able to think about asking to have different parts of the question, different parts of the passage, or different parts of the answers read to you, okay?
Okay.
And as always, any part that you don't understand when you hear it the first time, even if I'm rereading it, you can ask for me to read it again, even if it's the third or fourth time, or you can ask me to explain it. Can you explain to me just that part about, whatever, okay? You can always ask me to explain it in a different way as well, because sometimes when I explain it the first time, it still doesn't make sense to you. And you might have to ask me to explain it using a little different words or in a little different way, okay? Today, we're going to be looking at the reading passage. Remember that you can ask me to read anything to you that you need to have read as many times as you need me to read it. You can ask me to explain things, but remember that I can't help you decide how to answer your questions. Just remember what we've practiced, do your very best, and make sure that you ask me to read anything that you need to again.
Okay.
All right, we're ready to go? Go for it.
Can you read the questions first?
Great. All right, here's what you're going to be listening for. This passage can best be described as an example of a story, a play, a poem, an article. The second thing you're going to be listening for, the passage says one thing that made King Akbar a good king was that he read many great books, had many bags of gold, wrote many fine stories, or had many wise ministers. The third thing you're going to be listening for, how did the barber feel after the king told him that he would have to leave the kingdom? Angry, calm, sad, or thankful? Okay?
Okay. Can you read them again?
Yes. Question one you're going to be listening for. This passage was best described as an example of what? Story, play, poem, or article. The passage says one good thing that made King Akbar a good king was that he read a lot of books, that he had bags of gold, that he wrote many fine stories, or that he had many wise ministers? And the third thing, how did the barber feel after the king told him he would have to leave the kingdom? Did he feel angry, calm, sad, or thankful? Okay?
Okay, will you read the story?
Absolutely. Ready to go. Birbal and the Barber. King Akbar ruled India many hundreds of years ago. He did not know how to read or write, but he was a very good king. He surrounded himself with wise ministers who gave him advice about ruling the country. The cleverest of these ministers was Birbal, who often used his sense of humor to make the king aware of his mistakes. Many years ago, when Akbar ruled almost all of India, there lived a man called Birbal. Birbal was so wise that he became a minister in Akbar's court when he was very young. One morning, Birbal was strolling along the marble terrace of Akbar's palace when he saw Akbar's barber sobbing behind a rose bush. He hurried over and patted the poor barber gently on the shoulder. "What's the matter?" he asked. "The king has ordered me to leave his kingdom forever," the barber said through his tears.
Can you read the part about the barber and the crying?
Absolutely. Birbal saw Akbar's barber sobbing behind a rose bush. He hurried over and patted the poor barber gently on the shoulder. "What's the matter?" he asked. "The king has ordered me to leave his kingdom forever," the barber said through his tears.
Stop. I heard the answer.
Great job. Let's go back and see if you can find the answers to questions 1 and 2.
Okay.
Leave the kingdom forever? Why would he want you to do that? Well, this morning the king stubbed his toe and was stung by a bee right after he saw me.